weekend wrap up. And we're gonna start off today talking about probably the biggest surprise of the weekend being Oregon's loss to Stanford. Very surprising, not something that I or probably anyone ever really expected from the Oregon Ducks, but it happened. And what does that mean for their chances going forward to get into the playoff, the Pac-12's chances of getting into the playoff, and etc. Right now, Oregon, considering that they did have the excellent win over Ohio State on the road, if they can come out of this unscathed from here on out and win the Pac-12, I would say their chances are pretty good of still contending for that fourth playoff spot. But considering that Georgia and Alabama are playing the way they are and are likely to both get in themselves, it's just not looking good when you're going to have people contending, considering Penn State, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio State even coming back into the mix, as well as Oklahoma and teams of that nature. When looking at the rest of the picture of the playoff, especially later on as we get closer to playoff rankings coming out in November, I think the 2nd, I believe, of November, and looking forward into that, you're having to look at teams like Cincinnati and BYU. Cincinnati, who knocked off Notre Dame this weekend in South Bend, are they a true contender? We've heard from the past from the committee saying that teams in the group of 5 would have to play these Power 5 games to be even really considered for the playoff spot. And considering Cincinnati has beaten Notre Dame and Indiana, which both of those teams, as we know, aren't probably the greatest teams overall, but they did win. That's a win, and they are undefeated. So if Cincinnati does win out the rest of the season, how is the committee going to view those wins, and how are they going to approach Cincinnati come closer to Selection Day? And I think we'll be able to tell a lot by that on the November 2nd release of the rankings, as well as BYU. BYU is playing 7, I believe, Power 5 games this season. So if the committee is really weighing in on these Power 5 matchups, and you would like to assume that BYU would be weighted even heavier than Cincinnati, considering that they play more of those Power 5 matchups overall. Now looking at the conference championship picture, each conference has like their own, hey, here's this team that could very well be conference champion at the end of the year, apart from really the ACC being that they're in shambles and you don't really know who's going to come out of that. Other than that, though, the SEC, Alabama, Georgia is your top 2. Big 12, Oklahoma, Texas. The Pac-12 is Oregon is probably your top team there. But the Big 10 has Michigan State, Michigan, Iowa, Penn State, and Ohio State. There are 5 different teams that could very well come out of the Big 10 and win the conference. The thing is, who's going to be surviving the onslaught to get through to be the champion? Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State, and Penn State are all in the same division. One of those teams is going to have to go through the onslaught of doing that. And I think right now, still looking at the picture, Ohio State still has the best shot. Penn State is, they've had some good games that they've played with Auburn and Wisconsin, but those teams have not lived up to that expectation that they have. Auburn has struggled mightily with both LSU and Georgia Southern, and a couple games that they probably should have lost. And Wisconsin has really just dropped off from where they were or where their hype was at the beginning of the season. I'm looking at Michigan, and I really like their team. They have an explosive offense, and their defense is pretty good. I mean, it's going to be their real test. They got Penn State that they're going to have to play through. They got Michigan State that they're going to have to play through, which Michigan State is a really good team right now. So who's going to come through that gauntlet? And, really Ohio State, they have some inconsistencies, but I think that they're going to be able to develop a better team, and their talent and depth is going to really show through in the latter half of the season. And, I really haven't mentioned Iowa, but Iowa's defense is good. They can force some turnovers here and there, but I just don't think their offense is going to be able to carry them through to where they need to be for a Big Ten championship. They could be playing for it, but I don't think ultimately they win it. It's going to be either Penn State, Michigan, or Ohio State, who I think really has the best chance of winning the Big Ten title. So now We are going to go into our pick'ems for week 6. So I bring out my great pick'em scoreboard. The games of the week we just pick from the ESPN pick'ems that they have. So the teams will start from top to bottom. First game we have on the dock is Oklahoma, Texas. Oklahoma's offense has seemed to be doing slightly better in the past weeks. The offensive line, especially, letting, I believe, Kennedy Brooks and Eric Gray both are averaged about 8 yards a carry in the last game. So I think the line's getting better. I think that the offense is starting to kind of feel a rhythm, and Texas's defense is giving up lots of explosive plays. So if Oklahoma can capitalize and create some explosive plays, I think Oklahoma can win this, and if their defense can hold out, it's going to be a close one, but Oklahoma wins it. The next game, Arkansas and Ole Miss. This is an interesting game, considering I think Arkansas and Ole Miss are both really good teams this year. They both come off embarrassing losses, both to Georgia and Alabama. I think Arkansas's offense is very explosive, and I think their defense is very good. Didn't show last week, but I think their defense is a really good team. And I think Arkansas is going to narrowly win this one. About like the first one, it's going to be a close game, but Arkansas will pull it out in the end. The third game listed is Georgia and Auburn. I think this one's really self-explanatory. Georgia's team is, I have them number 1 in my rankings for a reason. Georgia wins out easily. Next one's up, Wake Forest, Syracuse. Wake Forest is putting together a very spectacular year, undefeated thus far. They're playing the Syracuse Orange in the Carrier Dome, which could possibly pose a slight advantage to Syracuse. But I think overall, Wake Forest will continue this streak and will remain undefeated past this week. Next up, BYU and Boise State. Boise State has kind of had a tough season. They've had a couple games that they should have won, but just weren't able to pull together there in the ends of them to make it happen. BYU, is undefeated, looking fairly decent overall. I think overall, though, BYU is going to pull this one out. Next game up, Iowa and Penn State. This is a very close game and a game to watch, especially earlier we talked about it being in the Big Ten race and who's going to be able to outlast all the other teams. I just don't think Penn State and the teams that they have played, being Auburn and Wisconsin, have been able to really hold up to what they were, and they struggled in both those games. Granted, they were early season games, and then teams not quite in the rhythm, but I think with that, Iowa's defense able to force turnovers the way they have been, I think Iowa will be able to win that game. Next up, Oregon State, Washington State. Washington State is really just in shambles. Is not a good team. Oregon State has been playing well, surprisingly well, actually, and I think that they'll come out with the victory. Next one up, Michigan and Nebraska. Nebraska is very close to being like 4-1. They are only having like 1 or 2 losses, and they've had some tough breaks in these seasons thus far. But I just don't see them being able to pull together. I think Michigan's offense is way too explosive to be lacking, to say the least. I think their offense is going to put up points again, and I think their defense is going to be able to hold Nebraska. Martinez, a great quarterback, he can run them all, but I think Michigan will be able to handle it fairly well. Virginia Tech, Notre Dame. This was also an interesting game for the fact that Notre Dame has just not been playing well. Their first game, they went to overtime with a terrible Florida State team, as the year has proven. Notre Dame is just not being Notre Dame, and they're not holding up that standard. Cincinnati beat them in South Bend last week. Virginia Tech has played okay for the year. They came out and beat North Carolina early in the season. And I think that that would be enough. That Virginia Tech is about on Cincinnati level, and I think if they can control the ball and score early, that Virginia Tech will be able to pull this one off. And then the last one, Kentucky at LSU. Kentucky has been surprisingly a decent team this year, undefeated so far, and I think that they will stay that way because LSU has been a terrible team for the second year in a row, and I just do not see them being able to pull a team together and beat Kentucky this week. That's all for our pick'ems. Feel free to put in the comments what you think of my picks. Put your own picks down there. I will be posting a picture of my pick'em scoreboard on the Wagon Sports Twitter. Feel free to go like it, share it, do whatever. Until next week. See you later.